empires and democracy do not coexist. And when you have something as powerful as these companies doing whatever they want and bulldozing over communities, taking people's land and resources, all in their self-interest and at the dispossession of others, you end up in a world where most people feel they are unable to collectively self-determine their future. And that is literally the basis of democracy. Like, if you don't feel like you have agency to shape the trajectory of your future, your community's future, your country's future, democracy doesn't survive.
S'il y a un livre à lire sur OpenAI et sur son patron Sam Altman, c'est celui-ci. Dans Empire of AI, la journaliste américaine Karen Ao livre une enquête magistrale sur les coulisses de l'ascension du mastodonte de l'IA que l'on connaît particulièrement pour son programme ChatGPT. Elle démontre avec minutie à quel point le développement exponentiel de cette entreprise est à la fois dangereux sur le plan de l'extractivisme des ressources naturelles, mais aussi particulièrement violent en matière d'exploitation du travail, et notamment de travailleurs et travailleuses dans les pays du Sud Global. Cette dynamique réactive une forme de colonialisme de la donnée qu'elle amplifie d'ailleurs, et l'autrice compare l'entreprise OpenAI à un véritable empire privé, opaque, secret, en quête de domination totale sur tout le secteur. Et pour y parvenir, OpenAI et Sam Altman n'hésitent pas à mobiliser une rhétorique quasi religieuse, millénariste, en parlant d'une hypothétique IA générale qui viendrait remplacer l'humanité et à laquelle nous devrions collectivement nous préparer d'ores et déjà en levant tous les freins qui pèsent sur le développement du secteur. C'est d'ailleurs par là que commence notre entretien tout de suite avec la journaliste Karen Ao.
My first question is a bit more metaphysical, let's say, because AI stands for artificial intelligence, and you work very specifically, reports on the fact that nothing is artificial, nor it is intelligent in the human brain, human consciousness sense. So is AI a kind of mystification or a cult?
Yeah, I mean, the term is certainly a mystification in the sense that that is quite literally why it was coined in the first place. As I talk about in my book, it was coined by this assistant Dartmouth professor, John McCarthy, in 1956, when he was trying to get money for his research, and he realized that the research he was performing under a different name wasn't exactly attracting the attention that he wanted, both from funders as well as the public and from scientists. And so he chose the term artificial intelligence in part to make it more evocative. And it was actually against the advice of his mentor, Claude Shannon, who explicitly thought that this term would overpromise, it would confuse people, and it would peg the field to too elusive of a concept, because there's no, all the way till present day, there's no scientific consensus of what human intelligence is. But it ended up sticking, this term. And so I do think that it has continued to mystify a lot of people about ultimately what this technology is, how it works, what the limitations are. And it also makes it sound like one technology when it's actually a collection of technologies that really often feel like they don't have any association with one another. So that makes it even more confusing. And because of it, not only was a mystification for the public, I do think it also became a powerful reframing for scientists of what they were doing. And that has led all the way to present day, where we see a cultivation of quasi-religious movements in Silicon Valley around the idea that it is even possible for scientists to recreate human intelligence, to recreate digital intelligence that might actually, in fact, be superhuman. And now many of these scientists that marinate in this world end up worshiping this belief that they can recreate so-called digital gods, and they were brought on this earth to do that, and that this digital god will have civilizationally transformative impact, either bringing us to utopia or killing us all.
Yeah, I think you explicitly refer to AGI, artificial general intelligence narratives. if we set aside the content, because you just explained it, is there a political motive behind those discourses? I'm thinking about hiding another truth about the very materialistic impacts and the impacts on labor and on human exploitation that is hidden by this grand narrative about AGI.
The thing that I was most surprised about reporting on the book is I thought it was only politically motivated, that these narratives were explicitly just being used to cloud people's true understanding of what was going on. But I realized that these people who profess a quasi-religious belief in AGI, that's a real belief that they have. And so it's multi-layered in the sense that some people truly think that this is that they are in fact recreating human intelligence or recreating God or what, however they specify it. And, you know, I was talking with people who their voices were quivering from the speculation of what this technology could bring. So it was a genuine, very visceral reaction. But on top of that, there are certainly other people who then take advantage of the fact that these are now narratives floating in the water. And they then leverage those narratives, and it's often the executives of the companies that are doing this. They leverage the narratives to speak to Congress, speak to the public, speak to other governments all around the world, to really try and do exactly that, to cover up the fact that this technology has borne an extraordinary environmental, labor, and social cost on the world by projecting this idea that AGI is too important not to try to create, and it will be too profoundly beneficial to not too profoundly beneficial or too profoundly devastating to not have the US control. And so that was the thing that was most surprising to me, was that actually beneath the rhetoric are in fact deep-seated spiritual beliefs that then continue to fuel and create more fodder for the rhetoric that ends up being leveraged.
You followed OpenAI specifically, and you talk about other companies, but over the course of years. So what struck you the most about this company in particular over the course of your years of reporting?
The reason I focused on OpenAI was because they were the ones that made some of the key decisions that have led us to this aggressive AI race today. The first key decision that they made was to scale transformer-based neural networks to a historic size, and to even decide we're going to scrape the entire English language internet and as many other languages as possible to feed into these models, and that we're going to shift from training models with only a few dozen or a few hundred chips, which was already considered colossal, to 10,000 chips in one fell swoop. So that was the leap from GPT-2 to GPT-3. And whereas the ChatGPT moment in the public led to the public's kind of sudden realization or sudden revelation that AI was accelerating and advancing, and this was like a new technology. I mean, the ChatGPT moment for the tech industry was the GPT-3 moment. And when GPT-3 came out, suddenly every single company, Google, Meta, I guess Meta was a late mover, but Google, Anthropic, all of these other entities then swooped in to do the same, to follow the same scaling paradigm. And that to me, most of the harms, or the most extraordinary harms of OpenAI's approach to AI development and the current industry's dominant approach to AI development, come from that very first decision to aggressively scale.
Yeah.
And of course, there are many other developments that OpenAI then chose to do, like that then became the norms for the rest of the industry. So the fact that they used Scale.ai to perform reinforcement learning from human feedback, one of the techniques that they've developed to try and make these models appear more friendly, more helpful, and more engaging, Scale.ai then became the de facto platform for the generative AI era. Many companies started using that. And then, of course, that ties directly to some of the news this week with Meta now striking a deal with Scale.ai to try and continue to establish Meta as the leader of the generative AI race. So, that's ultimately why I wanted to tell a story through the company, because that was the only way to actually document the real historical decisions that seeded all of the everything that we see today.
Let's talk about Scale.ai, because you describe this company and others gravitating around it as one of the most exploitive form of labor we know in the current world. Can you just tell me about the business model, the way it operates, and how it relies on the exploitation of laborers in global south country, low-wage laborers that work in conditions that you describe that are truly horrendous and very precarious, because they can be let off anytime. The way the work is structured is extremely precarious. So can you maybe tell me a word about this?
Yeah, so Scale is, they built their bread and butter as a middleman platform for coordinating contract workers in poor areas with AI companies that really needed a lot of human labor cheaply. And the way that Scale approached it was an Uber-like model, where they create a platform that allows anyone to simply log on, create an account, and then they get a queue of tasks that start populating from companies where it's completely anonymized. They do not know the company that they're actually working for. And they then click into the tasks and try to perform those tasks. And Scale became an important player because before that, it was primarily platforms like Mechanical Turk that sort of had a similar philosophy, except for the fact that Mechanical Turk was a very generalist platform. It was like any company that's looking for contract labor, and Scale decided to specialize specifically in AI companies and the type of labor that they needed: data annotation, data cleaning, data preparation, and ultimately now reinforcement learning from human feedback. And initially, they provided more hands-on training for the workers. So there was more of a guarantee of quality. At least that's how they marketed themselves, and that's why companies originally tried to gravitate towards Scale. But early on in Scale's history, they hit upon this interesting anomaly, which is that they originally were trying to target more English-speaking countries, English-speaking because of their histories of colonialism, like Kenya and the Philippines. And then all of a sudden they got a huge influx of signups from Venezuela. And it was because Venezuela was having the worst peacetime economic crisis in 50 years. And it suddenly checked off 3 boxes. There were people who were highly educated, had great internet connectivity, and were absolutely economically desperate and therefore willing to work for any price. And that ended up being the trifecta of exactly the population that Scale needed to keep their costs extremely low, but still deliver quality to their clients. And so that ended up becoming a playbook, what I call the crisis playbook, for them to replicate again and again and again. And so during the pandemic, Scale started expanding dramatically because many countries were suddenly in crisis. Many populations were suddenly very economically vulnerable while being highly educated. And you saw Scale aggressively recruiting all over in Northern Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, in economically vulnerable parts of Europe. And the problem is these workers, that Scale, Scale employees have repeatedly told me through the years that Scale does not invest at all in making the experience better for the workers. They spend all of their time giving white glove service to the clients, And so the platforms that the workers work on can be really buggy, unstable, and buggy in ways that often leave workers without pay, or buggy in ways where they automatically have their accounts deleted for no clear reason, because the moderation systems that Scale uses to try and close out scam accounts or accounts that are spamming the system are not very good. So they end up closing off legitimate workers that might have contributed significantly to the clients. And I think in general, with platform-based Uber-like models, the companies that run the platforms, they are incentivized to have a labor oversupply, because that is what leads to more cash inflow, to more clients picking their platform, is how quickly they can assign workers to the task. And so that in itself becomes like an inherent level of exploitation, where these workers are competing for fractional jobs and fractional amounts of money.
You call it disaster capitalism, which I believe is also a book published by
Yeah, from Naomi Klein.
Could you describe a typical day of a digital labor worker for an AI company like OpenAI, and also the very consequences, both physical, psychological, it can have on those workers specifically?
Yeah, so OpenAI contracts many different types of digital workers, but the ones that I spent the most time with was the digital workforce they contracted for content moderation. And this was during a time when OpenAI was shifting from a more fundamental AI research orientation to a more product commercialization orientation. And they realized that if we put text generation capabilities in the hands of millions of users, that could lead to a PR crisis if we do not have any ability to block the toxic, racist, abusive content that's coming out of our models. And the only reason why these models will spew that kind of stuff is because they're trained on the internet, and these large scale data sets are very, very polluted. And as much as OpenAI uses automated methods to try and cull out that pollution, automated methods aren't perfect. So you end up still having an enormous amount of pollution in these data sets. And so they contracted these Kenyan workers through a middleman firm called Sama, that took a different model from Scale, in that they have much more, they contract workers with an actual, like they give workers an actual legal contract, and then they give them shifts to work on the projects, and the projects will last for a certain amount of time. So it's much more of a business outsourcing model. And the Kenyan workers, they were expected to read through reams of the worst text on the internet, as well as AI generated text, where OpenAI was actually prompting their own AI models to imagine the worst text on the internet, and then asking the workers to put into a detailed taxonomy what each of these pieces of content, what was the actual offensive category.
So we're talking about sex abuse, incest, horrible child abuse, like the worst of the worst.
Absolutely. Yeah. They split into 4 different categories: hate speech, harassment, violence, and sexual content. And then there were degrees of violence, degrees of sexual content that included things like child sexual abuse. And those then mapped perfectly to this day, I believe, if you look at OpenAI's content moderation filter application programming interface, it has all of those categories available for its API customers to toggle on and off each of these different filters. And so that is why ultimately the workers were doing this detailed taxonomy. And one of the workers that I spoke with 4 workers who did this work, and I highlighted one of them, Mo Fadokinye, in the book, who was on the sexual content team. And the work completely changed his personality. He was reading all this child sexual abuse content day in and day out, and he did not even know how to convey to his wife why he was completely changing and turning in on himself. He used to be very extroverted, gregarious, and then he became very, very introverted, quiet, anxious, moody. And he couldn't say, like, my job is to read sex content all day. He thought that sounded incredibly shameful. It didn't sound like a real job. ChatGPT hadn't come out yet, so there was no conception of like why would you be doing that? And so one day his wife texts him, I would like fish for dinner. She buys, and he goes out to the store, buys 3 fish, one for him, one for her, and one for her daughter, his stepdaughter, who he called his baby girl. And by the time he got back, all of their bags were packed and they left. And she said, I don't understand the man you've become anymore. I'm not coming back. And so that I ended up highlighting that story out of the 4 because it really, really illustrates how much this horrific work does not just break down the individual, it breaks down their families and their communities and the people that depend on them. And not only did Moffat's wife leave, but then later on when ChatGPT came out, his brother, who is a writer, a freelance writer, stopped getting contracts. And, you can never prove why the brother stopped getting contracts, but they feel that it was because all of his work started being automated by ChatGPT. So it's just like multiple intersecting harms that Moffat and his family experienced. His psychological harm, his wife's harm of losing a man that she loved to the point where she couldn't trust him anymore, that child's harm of losing a stable family, and then the brother's harm of losing his future economic opportunities. I mean, it's just like again and again and again, it kind of illustrates the real logic of what this particular manifestation of AI development will bring us.
And this is why the empire analogy becomes relevant, because isn't it a very historical strategy of empires to exploit, usually overseas, and to hide this exploitation? So maybe can you tell me more about why you chose to refer to the history of colonialism and empires to actually depict this whole industry?
Yeah. So there are 4 different parallels between empires of AI and empires of old that I highlight in my book. The first one is that empires lay claim to resources that are not their own, but then they act like the rules suggested those resources were always their own. And with empires of AI, that refers to the way that they scrape the entire internet and say it was in the public domain, it's totally fair game. Or they take everyone's intellectual property and say, well, this is fair use, so it's totally valid. Empires also, as you mentioned, exploit an extraordinary amount of labor, so that's parallel number 2. And it doesn't actually just refer, for empires of AI, it doesn't just refer to the labor exploitation that happens during the production of the technology. It also refers to the fact that the technology they're producing is inherently labor automating. So OpenAI's definition of artificial general intelligence is highly autonomous systems that outperform humans in most economically valuable work. So they quite explicitly articulate that their goal is to automate away the tasks that people usually get paid for. So that in and of itself then leads to the erosion of workers' rights, leads to the erosion of economic opportunities. So it's labor exploitation on the way in and out. The third parallel is empires monopolize knowledge production, which is what makes it so hard to then get a clear picture of the harms that empires perpetuate. And what we've seen with empires of AI is in the last 10 years, because they have become so resource rich and are able to pay compensation packages that easily exceed $1 million, AI researchers have shifted from academia and from independent AI labs to working for these companies. And that would effectively be the same thing as most climate scientists being bankrolled by oil and gas companies. You clearly would not get a good picture of what the state of the climate crisis is. And that's exactly what's happening in AI research, where the fundamental understanding of how this technology works and its limitations, which then is meant to help inform the public and policymakers, is being completely distorted in favor of the empire. And then the last parallel is that empires always engage in this narrative that there are good empires and evil empires. and they, the good empire, have to be an empire in the first place and engage in all this exploitation, all this extraction, because they need to make themselves strong to beat back the evil empire. And throughout OpenAI's history, there's always an evil empire. It shifts over time based on what's convenient. In the beginning, the evil empire is Google. Now the evil empire is China. But it continuously serves this narrative that if you do not allow us to go as fast as possible, the evil empire will get there first, build this technology, and bring humanity to hell. But if you allow us to go as fast as possible and have unfettered access to these resources, we can civilize the world. We can bring progress and modernity to humanity, and humanity will finally have a chance to go to heaven.
Talking about resources, another aspect, which is the elephant in the room. However clear the data is presented to the world in terms of the environmental toll this industry has, I've got this feeling that it doesn't percolate somehow, or people don't care, or I don't know. What is your feeling about the complete chasm between the data we have and the fact that still we don't somehow stop the extractivism, or the scaling doctrine that you described is still so prevalent on a political level that it's almost impossible to imagine AI without massive extractivism of resources, be it water, energy, minerals. What's your understanding of the situation?
I personally feel that the reason why it hasn't percolated is two reasons. One, that these companies have done such an effective job of making it seem like this is the only path to AI development. So for people who hear about the environmental extractivism, they're like, well, but that's just the cost of progress. Like, they don't want to give up AI because they're the ones richly benefiting from it, you know? And if the harms are being perpetuated elsewhere, I mean, a lot of the economy is based on this idea that people at the top get to richly benefit, and then there's all these like grotesque supply chains that harm other people. So there is this kind of, oh, well, isn't every industry like this, and we don't want to actually shortchange the industry that is going to give us all these potentially profound benefits. And so that, and of course, that is actually a bogus idea that this is the only path for AI development. And in fact, I argue that this path actually shortchanges truly beneficial AI development. Like, that one of the things that I talked about in the book was that companies like Google or Baidu, for example, they were actually doing research for AI in healthcare, AI in drug discovery. And then they stopped doing that research because the computational intensity of supporting a generative AI chatbot was so high that they couldn't afford to have other computer chips doing other stuff. And I think the second reason it doesn't really percolate is because we are talking about scales that the average human has never encountered. So it only ever exists in the abstract for them. I mean, and I think this is actually, I've started to believe that with OpenAI in particular, this is one of Sam Altman's strategies, that he throws out numbers so large that it's really difficult for people to even wrap their minds around it. And, you know, recently he announced, or President Trump announced, standing next to Altman, the Stargate project in the US, which is a $500 billion investment into building out this computational infrastructure. And, you know, like, no one, 99% of the world has never encountered 500 billion of anything, let alone $500 billion. And the only way that I've been able to try my best to show the sheer scale of this is by pointing to the Apollo program, which was $300 billion over 13 years. Stargate is supposed to be $500 billion over 4 years. So I point out like, they are spending an order of magnitude more money than what was spent to put the first men on the moon. And even then it feels a little bit insufficient. But then the funny thing is, Altman then immediately after this announcement was like, it sounds crazy big today, but wait until you see me raise $5 trillion for the next cluster. And that, yet again, like, I mean, I don't even remember what the national deficit for the US is anymore, but like whoever encounters 5 trillion of anything. And so I think it just stuns the mind. It boggles the mind. And that's why at that point, it just starts to seem like it's kind of like any other industry. Like, oh, well, there's exploitation happening for everything. And people don't realize the actual sheer escalation of exploitation, environmental harm that's coming out of this industry in particular.
Sam Altman is very keen on using a reference to the Manhattan Project, to the OpenAI kind of breakthrough in science and technology. So he truly believes that he's doing the next nuclear bomb-like advancement in science.
It's hard to know whether he truly believes it, but certainly he has realized that evoking the Manhattan Project is something that is very effective in getting people to pay attention, both employees as well as policymakers. Like, he uses this phrase in recruitment and employee onboarding as well, to instill in people a sense of responsibility, which is not only effective in getting people to take their work at OpenAI very, very seriously and to dedicate an extraordinary amount of time. Like, OpenAI employees work around the clock. They do not have any work-life balance. It's also very effective in establishing a extremely heightened degree of secrecy within the company, which, is also just very useful when you're dealing with a company that you don't want to leak IP. But I mean, yeah, whether or not he actually believes it is hard to say. Like, one of the things that was quite fascinating for me talking with a lot of people who had either worked for a long time with Altman or worked really closely with Altman is, regardless of their exposure to him, no one could articulate what he actually believes. And it wasn't, that's not me saying it by observing what they were saying. It's them saying it. Like, each of them was calling out the fact that they did not know what he believed, and that ultimately this was like a black box. It's like, what are his core values? No one really knows.
You've been also raising the alert. I've seen a video for the Democracy Now! That this industry causes major threats to democracy. Could you maybe tell me what exactly, what kind of threats should we be aware of?
Yeah. So when I first started the book, I very much thought I was going to focus on vertical harms. Let's look at the full supply chain of AI development and deployment, and look at the labor exploitation, the environmental harms, the data privacy infringement, the copyright infringement, the misinformation impacts. I was even thinking about, I ended up not writing about this, but like, I was even thinking about writing about like the deepfake nudes problem and the exploitation of girls. And what I realized when I finished reporting on the book was every single community that I spoke to that confronted these empires of AI, their initial reaction was exactly the same, which was a profound loss of agency, a profound feeling that they had no ability to self-determine their future anymore. And that's when I realized that this is actually a horizontal harm that we're talking about, that empires and democracy do not coexist. And when you have something as powerful as these companies doing whatever they want and bulldozing over communities, taking people's land and resources, all in their self-interest and at the dispossession of others, you end up in a world where most people feel they are unable to collectively self-determine their future. And that is literally the basis of democracy. Like, if you don't feel like you have agency to shape the trajectory of your future, your community's future, your country's future, democracy doesn't survive. And so that was the most alarming realization to me, was we are like these companies are literally threatening to return us to an age of empire and to erode away democratic rights around the world.
Which seems to be a major trend in Silicon Valley at large, isn't it? When you listen to Peter Thiel, he's very from
Yeah.
empires as well. Curtis Yarvin, he wants monarchy back.
Yeah. And it's very notable that it's not a coincidence that Peter Thiel is one of the two most important mentors of Sam Altman. And yeah, the politics of exit, this idea that democracy doesn't make sense anymore and we need to move to a networked state, a network of companies with CEOs at the top, has become very, very popular. And it manifests in very subtle ways within the industry too. Like when I speak with people in the industry, even people who seem very clear-eyed or critical or skeptical of what they're participating in, they still end up inheriting linguistic patterns from their colleagues where they talk about median humans and normal people as though like they're sitting up here and then they're just, playing around with the people below. And whatever the people below are doing is not necessarily their fault that they're harming those people. It's just that those people are stupid. And like if they were more educated, if they were more sophisticated, they would be able to do better for themselves.
This is a return to ancient regime, what we have in France, like a society of classes. The peasants, the bourgeois, and the aristocracy on top.
Yeah.
But this ended up in a revolution here. So do you foresee any way out of it? Is there a path to resist this return to the age of empires?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the features of empire is that they're made to feel inevitable, but throughout history, empires have always fallen. And there have been, I like the way that I see the resistance happening is when you recognize that the full supply chain of AI development and deployment actually is like different chokeholds that different communities can latch onto to restrict critical resources that the companies need access to develop their technologies and spaces that the companies need access to deploy their technologies. So I see like the fact that that data, all of that data that these companies are scraping, that data is actually collectively owned by people, collectively owned by artists and writers. And we're now seeing artists and writers suing those companies and saying, no, you cannot actually take our data. Like that is an act of resistance and an act of reclaiming ownership over that key resource. That we are also seeing hundreds of communities around the world rising up and pushing back against the data centers that are being developed in their communities. And many of them say, having spoken with around 4 or 5 of those communities, it's not that they don't ever want data centers. Like they understand that like data centers are also like the infrastructure of the modern internet, but they will not allow a data center to come in without giving back anything to that community. So they're trying to negotiate and force conversations, and some have been very successful in forcing companies to the table to have a real conversation about, can we actually build a data center and under what terms in your community so that it is mutually beneficial? So that's yet like another lever, another chokehold to resist the empire. Students and teachers, they are starting to sound the alarm on the fact that neither of them really like the fact that AI is starting to erode the next generation's critical thinking and leaving many kids shortchanged in their education. And they're starting to have many schools are starting to have very active debates on how do we actually deploy these technologies responsible under what terms? And that is a form of localized community-based participatory governance. And, companies, they're also pretty much every company in the world now is trying to figure out what is their AI policy, what is their AI strategy. And I would encourage any workers who care about this to ask their company, let's form a committee to talk about it and collectively decide with all of the stakeholders present how to deploy this technology responsibly within our office spaces. And if we do that 100,000 times fold, where there's democratic contestation at every single site of AI development and deployment, I think we will get to a point where we can actually contain the imperial approach to AI development and return to a democratic one.
My last question, you mentioned in the conclusion that Sam Altman loves Napoleon, as many people in power do. Napoleon ended in exile. So how do you foresee his trajectory? Because he's managed to actually secure loans of capital for Microsoft, to explain it. Will Sam Altman end up like a modern day Napoleon, dying on an island in exile?
I mean, maybe he will self-exile to Hawaii where he has properties.
Self-exile is an option, absolutely.
You know, like, because Sam Altman also has bunkers, and based on the various things that he's told people, it sounds like he has at least two bunkers, one in New Zealand and one in California. So if he felt under threat, like maybe he would go into exile in those bunkers. I don't know. But I think the one difference maybe between Napoleon trying to recreate the French Empire and Altman is Napoleon was trying to build like a nation state empire, and Altman's trying to build a corporate empire. And I'm like, who would be exiling?
Yeah. Maybe the board, but they didn't succeed the first time.
Right. Yeah.